So please welcome Osprey Orielle Lake again, and she will present her ideas on the rights of nature.
Woohoo! That's good to have friends in the audience. We plant some seeds, make you feel good. Good morning to everyone, and thanks so much for being at this conference with us. And I want to address a structural piece of the economics of sustainability. And Georgia invited me to make this presentation early on in the conference because my themes are meant to really generate a long view and systemic analysis for our debating and discussions over the next few days. So this is a little bit of heavy lifting, warning, that's why we had the break. Now we've got to get into rolling up our sleeves a little bit. I'm with the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network. And I love our acronym, which is We Can. And we frequently navigate urgent issues on the front lines of the climate crisis. And I wanted to, before I get into some more of my remarks, to echo the comments made by Michael Burne about this being a time of action. We really need all of us, I think, to be all hands on deck at this point, given the climate crisis and ecological tipping points. And our organization works nationally and internationally with women around the world finding solutions to climate change. And we work both at a policy level, advocacy level. We do hands-on trainings in DR Congo, in Morocco, in Latin America. And we also think, beyond this sort of organizing work, it's also important to do direct action and nonviolent civil disobedience and really weave together education with also these very action-oriented programs. We also are working on a 100% renewable energy program for women and a Women for Forests protection in different countries around the world. So just a little bit of background about what I do sort of in my day job all the time now. That said, while we mobilize and respond to immediate actions, it's also very important that we look at a deep structural analysis for our transformative strategies and change. And I think all of us are looking at how do we keep getting into a deep conversation about what change we need and how do we get from here to there, while at the same time we have to be very active because things are happening so rapidly. And how do we find that balance? With that in mind, I invite you to explore with me the following ideas and perspectives, which I also share with the growing international rights of nature movement. When the British began violently colonizing Tasmania in 1803, the settlers claimed that the Tasmanians were so ignorant and primitive and their skills so rudimentary that they were no longer knowing how to make fire. It was said that they had so deteriorated as a race that they could only obtain fire if ignited from wild nature, as from lightning striking a tree. In the colonizers' prejudiced and uneducated, in quotes, logic, they rationalized the horrific hunting and genocide of the Tasmanians by declaring them no better than savage animals, due primarily to their inability to make fire. Apparently not making fire was a quality that marked them as less than human. This then sadly led to the justification for genocide and taking of the Tasmanians' land. I share this story because in it are hard lessons that our society still struggles with today, some 200 years later. Beyond the horrid racism displayed, something quite powerful is often overlooked in the actions of the indigenous peoples. Of course, the Tasmanians knew how to make fire. Exploration journals from the 18th century document that they used wood drills to make fire. The colonizers' cultural lens, greed, and bigotry could not perceive that a highly sophisticated indigenous reverence, not a lack of technological skill, was at work. In respect to their sacred Dreamtime law, the Tasmanians actually chose not to make fire much of the time. Their spiritual way of life so honored this gift of nature and nature's timing of the gift that they did not normally forcibly wrest fire from nature until she granted it. And then the gifts were given to respect the use of fire. With the Tasmanians, as with so many other indigenous peoples, there is a deep understanding of the gifts given to us by the natural world and a clear effort to live in balance with them. Fire, as I think we're all learning, is a very expensive, beneficial to be sure, yet potentially dangerous gift. And it requires an enormous amount of reciprocity and discipline to use it in a sustainable way. And we can readily see the consequences of our modern fossil fuel addicted culture, in which we use many aspects of fire or energy, if you will, far too freely. The self-destructiveness of our top-heavy culture, meaning how we overconsume and live our lives, is a direct consequence of a general lack of respect and disregard for proper reciprocity for the things that have been given to us from the earth, from nature. Simple agreements and natural understandings, such as not cutting down more trees that are then replanted, harvesting wild plants with care to leave enough for next year's growth, putting nutrients back into the soil after the harvest, and making sure that all of our actions care for, or at least will not harm, the next generation. These are all part of giving to and caring for the places in which we live, the places that sustain us. So imagine an economy based on reciprocity with nature. Imagine understanding that even though Mother Earth offers us great gifts, we have governance and economic structures in which we understand that even though we can, we do not just keep taking and consuming, as the Tasmanians chose. I think we're living in a very remarkable time in which we have the opportunity to change everything about how we are living. The urgency of global warming is giving us the opportunity, or perhaps rather forcing us, to redesign our economic systems concerning how we are living with the earth and each other. We humans, I think it's important to remember, invented our economy. We built it, and we can build it again in a very new way. And in fact, we must if we want to survive and thrive. The 2008 financial crash, combined with the increasing dangers to our biosphere, to our air, our water, atmosphere, and food supply, gives us an opportunity to make new choices. Simply put, I don't think we actually want to recover the economy that we had, but rather to have a newly reinvented economy. We want a just and restorative economy. And as we head into the redesign, we need to look at the very DNA of our economic and legal structures in order to truly address systemic changes and root injustices. As an example, the new economy must take into account social, gender, indigenous, economic, and environmental justice. Here are some of the key ingredients to this new economy that many of us have been working to define. We need to transition out of the endless material growth model that is one of the foundations of the capitalist system. We need a new kind of society and economy that is based on the carrying capacity of the earth. We need a society based on different concepts of wealth and well-being. The new economy needs to take into immediate consideration frontline communities and the health and rights of those most vulnerable people. Unfortunately, frontline communities are becoming more frequent with extreme energy extraction and the mining of more and more of Mother Earth's resources. At the same time, frontline communities are best positioned to help guide us through an economic transition because they have the most experience with the urgency and the complexity of the changes needed. In the words of my colleague, Ariel Deringer of the Athabasca Chippewa First Nations in Canada, speaking about the impacts of the tar sands extraction on her community, this is what she had to say. Our people and our Mother Earth can no longer afford to be economic hostages in the race to industrialize our homelands. It's time for our people to rise up and take back the role as caretakers and stewards of the land. The next economy has to correct the old development model that has been practiced since the Industrial Revolution that requires consumption of enormous amounts of natural resources. This model is dependent on huge efforts in production, consumption, and transportation, and produces a great deal of waste, as we all know. It is also dependent on cheap labor and throwaway people. As we look into this new economy, there are some great campaigns and advocacy work going on, such as putting a price on carbon so polluters pay for their emissions. Implemented correctly, putting a price on carbon pollution can put a drastic and welcome shift in the market to move towards clean energy solutions. Divesting from fossil fuels and investing in renewable energy is another campaign that I think is very important. So is the move to amend. Cooperatives being established across the country and around the world, as Georgia mentioned. New economic indicators, localization movements, groups designing a just energy transition that uplifts frontlines communities degraded by extractive industries, and promoting community-based, decentralized renewable energy systems that create good, new, environmental, healthy jobs. All of these and more are part of the ecosystem of actions that are heading towards a sustainable economy. And to these great efforts, I want to specifically talk today about the movement for the rights of nature and how a rights of nature legal framework can affect our economy and our biosphere in a very potent and fundamental way. Rights of nature is actually very revolutionary and evolutionary. And at the heart of it can address our horrifically dysfunctional economic system that is destroying people and planet. As Naomi Klein has stated, our economic model is at war with life. After decades of environmental protection laws, which surely have achieved some notable successes, our modern legal frameworks have failed to prevent the increasingly grave threats of climate change, degradation of Earth's ecosystems, and the growing displacement of humans and other species. To truly live sustainably and live in harmony with the Earth, we need to change the very DNA of our economy and legal frameworks to adhere to the natural laws of the Earth. And for this, rights of nature can play a central role. The majority of the world's economies and legal frameworks are based on treating nature as property. Our life-giving rivers, forests, mountains are treated as property to be sold and consumed, often protected under commerce laws. As property, these natural communities and ecosystems are not recognized as right holders. In our legal systems, because nature is property, it is invisible in courts. By adhering to the current structure of law and economy, we are furthering a dangerous human relationship to the natural world of ownership and exploitation. We need an entirely different legal configuration that recognizes the Earth's living systems are not the enslaved property of humans. It is wrong for men to consider women property. It is wrong for one race to enslave another and claim them as property. So it is wrong for humans to have dominion over the Earth and see nature as property. Thank you. And think about it. If our environmental laws were truly working, I don't think we'd be in this climate crisis and environmental degradation worldwide. I mean, if this system was working, I don't think we'd be standing here today. Our current structure of law calls for environmental regulations, and these regulatory laws do just that. They're working just fine. They regulate how much pollution or destruction of nature can occur under law. The laws do not actually stop pollution and environmental destruction, but they rather regulate how much harm can occur. At best, these laws may slow the rate of environmental degradation, but they're not stopping it. In the United States, title to property carries with it the legal authority to destroy the natural communities and ecosystems. I mean, sometimes when I say these words, it's hard for me to even imagine, but this is what we have in our legal frameworks. Environmental laws in the US were passed under the authority of the Commerce Clause, which grants exclusive authority over interstate commerce to Congress. Treating nature as commerce has meant that all existing environmental laws in the US operate under the concept of nature as property. One of the systemic changes we can make, not just in the United States, but worldwide, is to move from a property-based legal framework to a rights of nature framework whereby nature is recognized as a rights-bearing entity. If rights of nature legal framework were implemented, activities that harm the ability of the ecosystem and natural communities to thrive and naturally restore themselves would actually be in legal violation of nature's rights. Organizations like the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, the Global Alliance for Rights of Nature, the Community Rights Program at Global Exchange, and our organization, the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, are working with communities to change the law. This work involves changing local laws to recognize that natural communities and ecosystems possess a fundamental right to exist and flourish, and that the residents of those communities possess the legal authority to enforce those rights on behalf of those ecosystems. And the exciting news is we are, in fact, gaining traction in this work. In 2006, the community of Tamaqua Borough in Pennsylvania, with the assistance of CELDEF, passed an ordinance recognizing nature as a rights-bearing entity. Since then, 120 communities in the United States have passed local ordinances to protect their ecosystems. Local ordinances today are protecting communities from harmful practices such as shale gas drilling and fracking. Destructive corporate activities that directly impact a community can be stopped as rights of nature and community rights are raised above corporate rights. We can change our laws. Think civil rights, suffrage, the end of apartheid. We need to think about the fact that we are in a revolutionary moment to change our current system. We need to see that taking back the right to environmental decisions in our community is a movement as large as the civil rights movement. At the national level, in 2008, Ecuador became the first country in the world to recognize rights of nature in their constitution. Chapter 7 of the Constitution of Ecuador now explicitly states that nature has the right to exist, the right to be cared for according to its natural life cycles and ecosystems, and the right to restoration in the event of environmental harm. Certainly, there's a lot of challenges in Ecuador around the implementation of the Earth laws, but it has been a significant step forward for the rights of nature movement. Additionally, Bolivia has established 11 new rights of nature laws after hosting the World People's Conference on Climate Change and the Rights of Mother Earth in April 2010, which also produced the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth. This is a very key document. You can download it. It's online. And it can serve as a constitutional model just as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And those of us working in this movement really see that these two are documents that need to stand side by side for human rights as well as Mother Earth rights. In 2012, in New Zealand, a river was legally declared a person with standing to bring legal actions to protect its interests. Other work is going on internationally, and our organization currently is working in the Maldives, some of the lowest lying islands in the world, which are now being threatened by sea level rise because of climate change. Recognition that aquatic, atmospheric, and terrestrial ecosystems possess independent, legally enforceable rights creates a legal framework in which governments and climate groups can politically force the kinds of changes that must occur to stop further global warming. If the Maldives adopts a rights of nature bill, which is a thing that we're striving to do right now, then activities that interfere with nature there, including the climate, would be in violation of those rights, and a lawsuit could be presented to the international community for violating the rights to climate. Surely, I think it's a very unconventional approach, but given the terribly slow pace of international negotiations and the threat of sea level rise to island nations, we think it's a really good and worthy pursuit. And just as a side note regarding actions on sea level rise, and for a little bit of comic relief when I heard about this, the work we are doing is in direct contrast to a very, let's say, unusual legal strategy here in the US. Some of you might remember that in 2012, we had North Carolina lawmakers try to actually outlaw sea level rise because it was bringing down the dollar value to their coastline. This is true. They were basically saying, we've got resorts to build, and we don't care what the rest of the ocean does. Our sea isn't going to rise, this is the number they gave, by more than 15.6 inches, because otherwise it's against the law. So it's another legal framework you can study and research. Okay, so what exactly does rights of nature have to do with impacting our economic structures and, in essence, counter the market-driven economy? Let's imagine the broad implementation and implication of Earth rights for a moment. Rights of nature laws would require a fundamental redirection of the world economy, necessitating that we adhere to the precepts that uphold the ecological design and boundaries of nature. I mean, this is simply common sense, but we have to figure out some mechanisms to get there. This would mean that human activities and the development must not interfere with the ability of ecosystems to absorb their effects, to regenerate their natural capacities, to thrive and evolve. As an example, current extractive policies like mountaintop removal to obtain coal, which destroys entire ecosystems, would be categorically illegal. So too would industrial agricultural practices that poison soil and water, genetically alter natural species, cause a loss of biodiversity, or any industrial activities that pollute the ecosystem and the atmosphere. Consequently, employing the rights of nature framework will encourage an economic transition to renewable energy, the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, the investment of resources in energy efficiency, and organic, diverse agriculture, all of which can support healthier ecosystems and promote vibrant local economies. Rights of nature laws require that those responsible, including corporate actors, be held accountable for negative environmental impacts, thereby encouraging economic models and practices that respect the natural limits and laws inherent to the natural world. Additionally, within a rights of nature framework, laws are conducive to revealing the true costs of industry because corporations and individuals are required to take responsibility for costs associated with any effort needed to ensure and protect the integrity and well-being of ecosystems for the entire cycle of activities of production and transportation, costs which have previously been externalized and passed on to others. A true cost economic model will drive industry toward sustainable activities and practices because it becomes cost prohibitive as well as simply prohibited to pollute and harm nature. It is important to say here that acknowledging and enforcing Mother Earth's rights does not stop development for the well-being of human communities, but rather reorients these developments to simultaneously protect ecosystem balance and respect the regenerative capacity of nature's vital cycles. Rights of nature legislation encourages the formulation and implementation of new economic structures and indicators such as gross national happiness, genuine progress indicators, index of sustainability, economic welfare, and others that do not rely upon GDP as the only true or accepted metric. And we must deeply question defining worth, wealth, value, and well-being based on only the measuring of money and quantities of material goods. Georgia was making reference to consumerism in her opening remarks and about advertising industry. I mean, I think we really have to get at this topic while we're at this conference. The vital force of life itself and human happiness cannot be forced into a monetary system. They simply don't equate. Truly at the core of our global societal and environmental crises is a need to change our fundamental personal values and what we uphold as valuable in our lives. When we honestly look at the level of systemic change now required to meet the urgency of time, we can see that personal transformation and changing how we are living with nature, our worldviews, and understanding that our earth is sacred is critical to mitigating our global crises. In this sense, the development and implementation of rights of nature is best understood as a deep and necessary shift in our human understanding about our relationship to our earth. And it can best be seen not only as a change in law and economic structures, but also as a transformer of values and culture. These earth laws can in part help us to restore the ancient and life-sustaining concepts that have been damaged in our current times, while also opposing the destructive impulse of the free market, which has been codified and empowered by legal structures that treat nature as human property. Indigenous communities, of course, worldwide have been demonstrating sustainability development for thousands of years. So in some ways, this is really not a new understanding. It's a way for us in our modern culture to recapture and relearn what we all at one time knew, which is that we needed to live within frameworks that honored our Mother Earth. And for those of you engaged with climate change or negotiations concerning climate change, you know that a central discussion in quote, solving the crisis is through market mechanisms, through the buying and selling of the right to pollute the atmosphere through schemes like carbon trading. It's not a surprise that in these schemes, nature is assumed to be a commodity and that the commodification and financialization of nature is inherent in the capitalist system. Yet we have to ask ourselves, Do we have the right to sell and destroy something that belongs to everyone and should be a shared commons? And does it make any sense to try to protect nature and heal our damaged ecosystems by subjecting nature further to an economic system that caused the damage in the first place? Robert Gooden, a social and political philosophy professor at Australian National University, makes reference to the selling of permits to pollute as similar to the medieval selling of indulgences by the Catholic Church. The Church offered forgiveness for past sins through the purchasing of an indulgence, effectively giving the sinner a clean slate. The selling of environmental indulgences, Gooden notes, is the selling of forgiveness for future environmental harms. Essentially, one would be purchasing permission to commit a wrongdoing. It is saying that it's okay to irreparably harm the environment so long as you pay for it right beforehand. Okay, so I'm just going to conclude with one part of my presentation I wanted to get into, and especially this is for Bill Twist and many others. I want to take a moment to talk about a concept in my closing comments that comes from indigenous peoples of the Andes and from our allies in social movements in the Global South, something that I've been very touched by. To more fully understand rights of nature and a way forward, I think it's very helpful to approach the concept of what's called sumac causai, which has been translated also as buen vivir in Spanish and loosely means living well. We may think that the concept of living well refers to an easier life that is connected to nature, but sumac causai is much fuller and much more complex than this. The term is actually difficult to translate into English, but after some research and conversations with colleagues and indigenous friends, I just want to make a suggestion about what this term means. It means living in ecological and economic balance, harmony in relationships, personal and collective growth appropriate to local conditions, good health, and living well in community, but this also includes the community of the entire Earth community and nature. It also offers a worldview of living in a cosmos that we are part and particle of, into the larger framework of our living universe and nature. It's a very expanded term of right relationship with creation. Earlier this year, I was in Ecuador and was honored to meet with indigenous women leaders from many different regions of the Amazon. We were meeting to have an in-depth deliberation about the resistance movements of these women in various regions of Ecuador and how women are fighting to protect the rainforest and their way of life. And I'm very honored that we have a program to work with them in this effort. At the meeting, as we were offered delicious, very, very delicious roasted corn that the women had grown and then brought to the meeting, we began a conversation about sumac causai and different views of wealth. One of the indigenous women conveyed her experience of traveling to several cities in the United States and observing how people in the cities have only one kind of corn to eat, and that's exactly the same kind of corn that our animals eat. She said, I thought you were all so wealthy there. I think this means you're very poor. Here we have all kinds of corn that we grow. We have 12 different kinds of corn in our community. We have special corn for different activities, for ceremony and times of the year, and for this age group and this particular time of the year. And this is wealth to us. This is what true wealth is to us. This, in part, is what is meant by living well, as defined by indigenous people, the wealth of diversity, which is central to the idea of rights of nature, rights of Mother Earth. In the Global South, sumac causai, or buen vivir, of course, has been a way of life for indigenous people for thousands and thousands of years. But the concept more recently emerged and became visible in social movements as a reaction to traditional strategies for development and their negative environmental, social, and economic effects, particularly for indigenous peoples. Sumac causai, or buen vivir, and rights of nature simultaneously actually were incorporated into Ecuador's constitution in 2008 and were ushered in primarily due to the influence of indigenous peoples. After historically being excluded from the political process, indigenous groups, especially concerned about the worsening environmental devastation of the extractive business and global climate change, started social movements aimed at creating a new approach to development that would protect ecosystems. Sumak Khalsai offers an important direction forward to overcome the obsession with Western views of, in quotes, development, and created the context to explore alternatives. Sumak Khalsai calls for a reduction on economic and productive development, and instead an increase on human development, such as an encouragement of ethical values, spirituality, creativity, and a deepening of our own connection with Mother Earth. Eduardo Gudinas, senior researcher at the Latin America Center for Social Ecology, points out, Sumak Khalsai is distinct from Western knowledge, which is rooted in modernity, and in its new rendition has emerged as an expression of decolonial efforts and attempts to strengthen cultural identities. However, he points out that the concept should not be understood as a return to a distant indigenous past. Rather, Sumak Khalsai is not a static concept, but an idea that is continually being created and regenerated. It is also distinct to each culture with its own language, history, specific social and political contexts, and is placed in diverse environments. I think the fact that Sumak Khalsai is specific to place and culture gives us an incredible opportunity to explore its expression in our modern economic reinvention. Of course, history and logic dictate that transitioning away from a globalized economy based on nature as property and moving towards ideas like Sumak Khalsai will not be smooth or easy. Yet our survival depends on our ability to do so, and also to do so quickly. Given the power structures of today, it would not be prudent to think that the changes we want to do and want to see happen are going to happen without our direct assertion. So a real component of the battle for environmental and economic justice and transformation is in fact in the streets, in the schools, in the fields, in our communities, in the forests, in the marketplace, and again, echoing the call to action that was stated earlier today. True transformative policies are only going to change when we also have strong social movements pushing for them. And I must say that the movement has wind in its sails right now after 400,000 of us marched in New York City last month, along with thousands of people worldwide. Of course, we must keep in mind that global warming is urgent and our window of time to act is, in fact, small. The time frame is small, so we must act in big and fast ways, while remembering that our actions must also be deep and systemic to address the very foundation of how we are living with each other and the Earth. I want to welcome you today to join Shannon Biggs of Global Exchange, who is an incredible colleague of mine, who I'm so honored to work with. We'll be doing a workshop this afternoon to delve more deeply into this conversation, which I'd love to open up these topics with all of you and get some feedback and conversation going. And in closing, what I love about the possibility of rights of nature is that it can help us reconnect with nature, with Mother Earth. To me, this is essential because underlying so many of the root causes of our destructive relationship with nature is our belief and experience that we are separate from nature. This sense of disconnect from our living Earth has proven to not only be spiritually heartbreaking, but a disaster in the human experiment. An economy or culture deprived of its connection to nature is simply not sustainable. My great hope is that the environmental and economic crises we now face will bring us home, back to Earth. Thank you.
Thanks.